This is On Assignment.
Hey everybody, welcome to On Assignment. I'm Alex Villarreal.
And I'm Imran Siddiqui. In this episode, U.S. surveillance leaker Edward Snowden is on the run, how his fugitive status is affecting the White House.
President Obama visits Africa. Our West Africa correspondent tells us how people in Senegal view the visit.
And later, the mystery of the disappearing bees and a scenic rail ride connecting South Koreans to their rural roots.
Let's get it all started. We're going on assignment. Former U.S. intelligence contractor Edward Snowden is very much a wanted man after leaking information about classified U.S. surveillance programs, but whether he will return to the U.S. to face charges remains very much in doubt. Snowden first sought refuge in Hong Kong and then flew to a Moscow airport while asking for asylum in Ecuador.
And joining us right now is VOA's White House correspondent Ken Klein. Thank you so much for joining us. Ken, we've seen this saga turn into a global cat and mouse chase. What do you think is happening with the White House?
Well, I would not say it's exactly dominating the conversation there, but it has certainly attracted their attention. I mean, if you want the White House's attention, steal some potentially damaging U.S. government secrets, tell the world you have them, and then go to a number of countries with which the U.S. has somewhat adversarial relations. I can guarantee you that'll get the White House's attention.
Absolutely. Now, is there a fear that some of these countries, so, China was criticized by U.S. officials for deliberately allowing Snowden to leave Hong Kong. Then we have Russia now. He's said to be in this transit area, but there's fear maybe that Moscow is protecting him. Is there a concern on the part of the White House that Snowden might leak secrets to these different countries?
Oh, I'm sure there is. And that's something that they've probably talked with officials in these two countries about. And we'll just have to see what happens from there.
And how has it affected the U.S. relations with Russia and with China?
Well, it certainly hasn't helped. I think both China and Russia are walking a bit of a fine line here. Vladimir Putin, president of Russia, as does the Chinese government, derives some political benefit from opposing the United States on some things, because the U.S. is seen as perhaps arrogant or even hypocritical, and they're in those countries, and the leaders make some political hay from doing that. So that probably explains to a large extent why they did not extradite Edward Snowden to the U.S., even though they have extradition agreements. And as Secretary of State John Kerry pointed out, the U.S. has extradited 7 Russian fugitives to Russia in the past 2 years, and where's the reciprocity? But the leaders there also cooperate with the U.S. on a number of issues. U.S. and China, or Russia and China both, are cooperating with the United States on any number of things, and they can't go too far here. So I think that's why China did not detain Ed Snowden, and why Russia did not give him permanent asylum, because I think they got their mileage out of it, but I think they're free. They'll be happy to be free of the man.
And if you can, quickly in 30 seconds, isn't it ironic that an American is trying to seek asylum in countries where there's a history of not protecting people's civil liberties?
Precisely the point that various White House officials have been making the past few days, that he's very concerned, or so he says, about transparency in the U.S., but he seems to be going on a world tour, as you say, of countries that are not known for that.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Good to be here.
Yeah, it's always great to have you, Kent. Again, Kent Klein is our VOA White House correspondent. We are taking a break now. Coming up, President Obama travels to South Africa, Tanzania, and first, Senegal. You're watching On Assignment.
President Obama's trip to Senegal comes as the West African nation and the greater Sahel region face unprecedented security challenges from terrorist groups. For the first time, the United States is offering cash rewards to help track down the leaders of these transnational jihadist organizations.
But the U.S. strategy is ultimately focused on helping Africans solve their own problems. President Obama's visit aims to expand trade, investment, and democracy. VOA's correspondent in Senegal, Ann Look, says people are excited about the president's trip, though they may have originally expected more from him.
I think people had this understanding that he was kind of a special American president and he was perhaps going to pay more attention to them than other presidents had. And I think that's not really what happened. But, there's still, here in Senegal, people don't really have this illusion that they're going to really get to see him or touch him or talk to him but, the fact that he's coming is a big deal. People in Senegal describe it to me a lot as, oh, it's an honor.
What would be ideal is to not need people to come from the outside to tell us, yes, you are good democracy, you are good students. But it still makes people happy. It's Obama. He's a busy guy. It's an honor.
West Africa Research Center Director Ousmane Sène says Mr. Obama's visit will reinvigorate progress being made in Senegal.
His visit shows that this country, as little as it is, matters. Senegal has only 12 million inhabitants, and I don't think Senegal's economy is even as big as New York City's. We are small compared to the United States, but what we can bring to the world is something else entirely.
I like this.
Mr. Obama has only made one other trip to sub-Saharan Africa as president, to Ghana in 2009.
Thank you.
He called for better governance.
Africa doesn't need strong men. It needs strong institutions.
Perhaps the rareness of these visits in some ways make them more valuable.
And what have they told you about what they're hoping to hear from him?
I think this visit is being understood as kind of a kudos to Senegal for all that it's accomplished. And especially after last year, we had a pretty difficult election here last year. A lot of street protests, it looked a bit iffy for a while. It kind of pushed the country to the limit.
That election in 2012 began with deadly street protests against the incumbent's unconstitutional bid for a third mandate, but ended with a peaceful, transparent vote and the country's third democratic handover of power since independence in 1960.
I talked to a lot of people and they say they would just like to talk to Obama about kind of the daily problems.
Soccer coach Adi Ndoye says President Obama has a certain influence with African leaders, and he should use it more.
Not necessarily giving them lessons, but rather instilling in our presidents a way to run their countries that benefits everyone, not just the leaders and their families.
Major challenges remain in Senegal. Young people here say they would tell President Obama about how hard it is to pay for school or find a job.
We had hope with the new government, but we still don't have jobs. We are still here waiting. We need a new way to get there.
We want our country to be rich.
One of the main goals that I think has been explained by the administration, specifically Obama's administration, is this idea that Africans should build their own future and they should be responsible for their own policies. How is that policy received?
Yeah, so it's generally understood as the American approach is African solutions to African problems, and that's pretty well received. We've passed the 50-year mark in terms of independence for most countries on the continent, and they feel as though they're ready to take more ownership for the direction their countries are going in, the institutions they're building. But a lot of challenges remain. Mali is a perfect example.
France blitzed into Mali in January with airstrikes and 4,000 ground troops to push back a southern offensive by al-Qaeda affiliates, still active in the Sahel-Sahara region. That's not something you'll see the United States doing in the region anytime soon, despite the recent targeting and killing of Americans at the U.S. consulate in Benghazi and a natural gas facility in Ain Menas.
So, Anne, let's talk about the role of the U.S. military in Africa and this issue of drones specifically.
Yeah, the U.S. announced that it's opening its second drone base on the continent in Niger. And Niger, if you look at it on a map, is just smack in the middle of this very unstable region. You've got the Sahel, you've got Mali, you've also got Libya, you've got Algeria. And so I think this move, they obviously don't say much about it publicly, but this move is seen as kind of a reflection of the importance the U.S. places on this region and the threat that's in this region, and this desire to keep an eye on things, to surveil.
All right, and thanks again to Ann Look, VOA's correspondent in Dakar.
We're taking a break now. Later in the show, some new train lines are giving South Koreans a way to reconnect with the countryside. You're watching On Assignment. A steady decline in the overall honeybee population is a growing problem worldwide. The decreasing bee population could contribute to dramatic price increases for goods dependent on pollination by bees. As
VOA's Kane Faribault reports from Illinois, researchers are studying the decline as beekeepers struggle to keep their colonies and their profits alive. Kane put on a bee suit and he went into the field to talk with one beekeeper about his work, and we talked with Kane about what he found.
The research study that was done by Purdue focuses on this sort of talc, this powder-like substance which helps adhere some of these pesticides known as neonicotinoids to seeds as they're planted into the ground during planting season. So the bees that are flying around into farmlands, into places where they're trying to gather pollen, would come into contact with this talc-like substance, perhaps mistaking it for pollen, and the bees are ingesting it. It's getting into their system.
Since 1954, Terrence Ingram has raised tens of thousands of honeybees in managed colonies behind his house in rural Apple River, Illinois.
We had 250 hives at one time, and we sell 5-6 tons of honey a year.
But that amount is dwindling.
Now we're down to probably about 4 tons.
He says the gradual decline in his bee population began in 1996.
Every 3 weeks that summer, he was spraying with the airplane, and by the end of the year, I didn't have any of my 250 hives left.
This phenomenon caught the attention of researchers like Purdue University entomology professor Christian Krupke.
There have been similar reports from Europe in the past, and so we looked into it a little bit further from the point of view of wondering, first of all, what is killing these bees? And second of all, how are the bees acquiring whatever this toxic chemical is?
Christian Krupke is an entomologist at Purdue University in West Lafayette, Indiana. And he had heard reports about these acute bee deaths. So several years ago, he was part of a group that undertook a research study to really examine what was causing some of these acute bee deaths. And their research pointed to 2 specific substances, or neonicotinoids, that are included in planting of corn seeds. This is the pesticide that's put onto the corn seed in order to basically help prevent them from succumbing to insect damage as they're growing. Part of that research is what's contributed to lawmakers in the European Union from banning these neonicotinoids later on in the year. However, here in the United States, there's no such plan to ban. People on both sides of the argument as to whether or not these should be included outlined that there needs to be more research and more studying done. Christian Krupke, the entomologist, he's also indicated that there's more research that needs to be done. However, interesting point he made is that he believes that the research so far indicates that you could do away with these neonicotinoids and still have a successful harvest or a successful planting season.
Well, it's a great story, a very important story, but I'm kind of curious how you approached it, because you had some great shots in there. So did you dress up in the outfit? Did you have the beekeeper mask on? Did you, how close did you get to the bees?
So we should point out here, first and foremost, I have an irrational fear of bees. I don't like them. I'm always fearful of getting stung. The last time I was stung, I was about 5 years old, and it was a painful and excruciating experience for me. And even though it was such a long time ago, I don't want to be stung by anything. So the first shoot, which we did at Purdue University, they have a separate field where they keep a lot of these managed bee colonies. I asked them, is there any sort of protection that I could wear in order to prevent me from being stung? So from head to toe, gloves, suit, headgear, everything, I wore that, and I charged right into those bee colonies. Now, contrast that with what he was wearing. He was simply just wearing a hat and a mask, and he had no gloves on, nothing else on. He was perfectly fine. going into those bee colonies.
But they also, even if you didn't have anything on, the bees are not likely to sting because they actually spray them, some kind of element that they spray to kind of slow down their agitation.
Well, interestingly enough, I think that part of that spray includes a pheromone which comes from the queen bee themselves. But in both of the shoots where I went out into these managed bee colonies, there was no spraying going on whatsoever. However, again, too, that's also another stark reminder about the nature, I suppose, of the population of bees right now. If this was an ordinary year for bees, or if this was an ordinary circumstance, I couldn't really go into those colonies without there being some sort of fog or smoke applied before you'd go in there to film, because there would be a tremendous amount of bees populating these colonies.
And again, that was VOA's Midwest correspondent Kane Faribaugh. Now, Kane says that in the past 30 years, the number of managed bee colonies in the U.S. has been cut in half, from 4 million to just 2 million colonies.
Moving on to our next story from South Korea. If you're going on vacation there, you're in luck. There are now 2 new rail lines in service.
Yeah, and the new trains are giving passengers a chance to explore some very scenic rural parts of the country. VOA correspondent Steve Herman went for a ride and talked about it with our Doug Bernard.
On the O train, co-rail attendant Baek Da-eun explains that those accustomed to high-speed rail travel will experience a significant change of pace and style during a ride on what is known as the spine of the Korean peninsula.
When passengers board for the first time, at first they are awed by the train's exterior design and the internal decor.
Some passengers disembark to stretch their legs and watch a group of farmers. Others remain on board, waving to those working in the field and strike up a brief conversation.
Let's go eat sashimi after I finish work here.
These 2 trains are really the first trains purely designed for leisurely travel. We have in the city of Seoul, of course, we have a sophisticated subway system with lots of commuter trains, and there are the KTX high-speed trains to take people from one big city to another. But these are really trains that have been designed purely for travel, and the V train only travels at an average speed of 30 kilometers per hour over its 28-kilometer course back and forth between Buncheon and Choram stations, and the windows are very wide and long, and you get a chance to see scenery like you're not going to really see from a train anywhere else in South Korea.
So basically what you're describing are largely trains to nowhere that move slowly. So what's the appeal of these taking these trips?
Well, the appeal is really to savor the views of the natural rocks and cliffs along steep valleys and mountains. If you are in a hurry, do not take South Korea's newest trains. The electric 4-coach O train, running 4 times daily, circles a 5-hour, 257-kilometer course with stops at 13 stations. The 3-coach V train operates 3 times daily on a 70-minute shuttle between 2 rural stations 28 kilometers apart.
Who did you meet on board? Who was taking this?
It really went across all ages. We were out on a weekday, so I don't think we saw as many children as might normally be on the train on weekends. In fact, there was a group of elderly passengers who were all outfitted with their hiking gear. I'll tell you, I've climbed a mountain or 2 here in South Korea, and people who were in their 70s were just breezing past me on the ascent. Koreans are very hardy hikers, and they're in great shape. So I think for some of these people, it was a chance to get out to the countryside and get off the train and go into the countryside as well.
Steve, you're speaking to us in Seoul. You work there a lot. That is a 24-hour city, constantly abuzz, sort of maddeningly fast. What was it like for you to take the 5 hours that it takes to get on essentially this very slow, probably pretty quiet train?
Well, we actually went on both trains, departing from Seoul Station at 7:45 in the morning on the O train, and then journeying out for a few hours to catch the V train, and then returning on the O train, getting back into Seoul at about 10:30 at night. So it was a very long day, but it was extremely refreshing just to get out of Seoul, where I spend most of my time, and just breathe in deeply some fresh mountain air. That was really the highlight for me.
VOA correspondent Steve Herman in Seoul, breathing in that fresh mountain air. Well, now you can't get there by train, but space is the final frontier and one that African nations have so far largely not explored.
But with the emergence of space agencies around the continent, some intrepid space gazers are studying ways to boldly go where few Africans have gone before. In South Africa, VOA's Anita Powell takes a look.
This is the image many people associate with Africa. This is the new reality. This is Africa's largest Earth observation center at the South African National Space Agency. These satellite dishes monitor hundreds of privately owned satellites above Africa. Managing Director Raoul Hodges says the space agency is a valuable asset and that Africa has the means to go into space. But he says such a reality is years off and will take serious planning.
Yes. If you combine resources and you combine efforts such as the Nigerian effort, such as the Egyptian effort, the Algerian effort, and the South African effort specifically, where we have the infrastructure, and prior to '94 when we were able to integrate satellites, yes, the technical knowledge is there, and the capabilities there. Is there funding? Yes, there's funding. There's some rich oil nations in Africa.
Officials with the African Union say a Pan-African space agency can solve some of the continent's earthly problems.
It's one of the most important cross-cutting issues that serves agriculture, serves communication, serves infrastructure, serves border program, also serves demography and movement of people, serves peace and security, conflict management. It goes into mineral resources for future development. The idea of a space program is to develop a program that can provide the real data on ground in Africa, all over Africa, and provide it for the policymakers to be able to develop future policies and plans and strategies that are based on information, knowledge-based strategies for the future.
In South Africa, universities are also furthering space research. At this physics lab at the University of the Witwatersrand, graduate students are using a vacuum to test tiny micropropulsion systems that one day could be used to position smaller, less expensive satellites. It's a small step for researcher Jonathan Lunn, but he says his work could someday lead to great leaps in how normal people live their lives.
I think moving forward, we're definitely going to be saying, satellites are there to support, infrastructure that we rely on a daily basis already today. So moving forward, we can actually benefit the economy by building satellites and studying space.
Which brings us back to these lowly blessed box. Like many of us, they have little understanding of the complex calculations behind Africa's burgeoning space industry. But here on African soil, scientists are looking for ways to make our lives easier by looking to space. Anita Powell, VOA News, Johannesburg.
And with that, we've come to the end of our show, but be sure to check us out on Facebook, YouTube, and of course, voanews.com.
Well, and you can also get accurate captions for the show by clicking on CC in the YouTube player window.
We're so happy you joined us today. We will see you next time.